Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second class of the Financial Institutions Management. To start with, first of all, I would like to know whether you have any questions or any further clarifications needed with respect to the last Saturday class. Hope you have kind of understood it or followed it up well so that you don't have any clarifications needed. But as we go along today, if you have any clarifications needed, please, there's someone. This chat, right? Okay. So maybe we can go ahead and if you have any questions, please stop me and I will respond. Okay. Right. So to start today's class, if we first go through today what we have kind of, if you can kind of recollect what we did last time. What we did was like we tried to first identify why we are learning this subject because of the importance of financial institutions in an economy, and it has kind of a wider impact to the entire economy, the general public. So therefore, we kind of identified how that wider impact comes. What is the specific role that a financial institution carries out and how it happens. So what are the kind of special situations that financial institutions encounter because of being a financial institution? I mentioned like the two units in an economy, a group of people who has excess funds in an economy. We call them the surplus unit. And there's another group who really wants to do something, earn an income, who has some good business ideas. So they want to make some kind of invest some money in business, but they don't have sufficient funds for that. So this unit we call the deficit unit. So the financial institutions are the intermediaries who are operating between these two units to facilitate an economic activity, to facilitate economic activities. So that will create kind of more productive, more production, bring about development to a country, and then our economic development enhances and the living standards of the people can enhance. So like that it goes on. So that is the importance of financial institutions. So then we try to identify why their management of financial institutions is different from a normal company, because we know I told you we have a subject called management, general management. So why you just only learn that management and do kind of operate a fine? Why don't you only do that subject, the management, the normal management, and follow this operate a financial institution, rather than why should you learn something more specific about financial institution management? So there we identified the nature, the inherent nature of a financial institution, where I said most of the financial institutions are deposit mobilizing or fund mobilizing. So when they mobilize funds, the funds that they are using for the business operations are majority not their own funds, may not be the funds of the CEO or the employees who are working or the shareholders, but those are funds belonging to a totally different group who has no direct access to manage these institutions. That is what we call mostly the depositors or the creditors who provide funds. So since this other group of people who have no direct access to be managing a business, where when it is a financial institution is entrusting their money to another group of people to manage it and provide them provide them those funds safely along with the reasonable return, we have more wide, more specific, more comprehensive ways of managing financial institutions. So that is why this subject is important. So having understood the importance of financial institutions and the need to kind of study about financial institution management separately, then we started on the incorporation, because I said for any entity to become a financial institution, first of all, it has to become a corporate entity. So in Sri Lanka, how we get the corporate entity status is this incorporation. So there will broadly, it goes along with the Companies Act. When in Sri Lanka, it is the Companies Act of 2007 that governs the incorporation and other operations of the companies incorporated in Sri Lanka. So I kind of explained several important aspects with regard to incorporation and also about different companies, shareholders, directors, and different company names. And so these things are like more important things that it's not only for the setting up of a company, but they are important for you to know these differences. For example, if I explained to you what's the difference between a limited company and unlimited company and why that importance is needed. Then again, what's the difference between an offshore company and an overseas company? Again, we need to know the features, because if we know those only, when these companies of different nature, they come to us for a business transaction, then we have to identify those unique features of these different types of companies before we engage in different particular transaction with them, for us to ensure that we are entering into a transaction that is legally permissible. First of all, you have to know whether you are entering into a legally permissible transaction. So for you to know that, you have to know the nature of the company. Then also you should know, in case you enter into a legal transaction, in case there is some default, for example, especially when it comes to loans, if the borrower company defaults, do you have access to kind of recover it in full, or are there restrictions in recovering those? Is there permission for this particular company to borrow like this? That also comes sometimes. If the articles of association has restricted, then you can't. So like that, you need to know certain requirements in the Companies Act when you are dealing with corporates in your normal business transaction. So those are some slight few revision. Then there are some words, I think, if you are not very familiar with these company corporations and all that, I also kind of took you through some important words. So these are important to add them to your normal vocabulary, because when you are doing your business transactions, you need to be mindful, especially things like solvency test, stated capital, then the interest register, the duty of a director, what kind of a duty is there, then different types of resolutions, articles of association, importance of the certificate of incorporation, because if the certificate of incorporation is not available, means that there is no corporate entity. So if that document is not there, and if you enter into a transaction with a company just because they tell that we are an incorporated company, you are again facing a legal risk, because you can't enforce any legal contracts with a non-existent legal person. So that is the importance. So I think that is a revision that I would just to kind of update you what we had done last time. So with regard to the previous lesson, the key items are like what I have mentioned here. So I think if you can kind of concentrate on these two slides, what I mentioned here, and then do your studies for the exam purpose, that will be sufficient. But other information is also important for you to kind of expand your knowledge about the subject and progress in your day-to-day work. Okay, so let's see like what we are going to do today. So now, having learned how a company is incorporated, our next step is to see how financial institutions are kind of established. So there is a company that has been incorporated, or what we say a company is born. Now we need to identify different types of financial institutions that operate in our country and see how they are being set up. So generally, in order to become a financial institution, especially in the case of banks, finance companies, they have to be public companies. Now, there is a difference between public company and a private company. In the case of a private company, though the requirement is they can raise their capital, they can raise borrowings only private. They can't make public announcements. They can't go to the general public. And also there is a restriction on the number of shareholders. And there are few other requirements like about this interest register, whether they can maintain or not, and these things, and the name specifically. So that is a private. But in the case of banks, finance companies, it's a requirement that they have to be public companies. Now, if you look at insurance companies, I think there are some insurance companies that are private, but in there again, there is a requirement after setting up, within few years of setting up, they also have to be public and even maybe moving to become public companies. So these are the requirements imposed by different regulators with respect to different types of financial institutions. So if we take these financial institutions operate in the financial system. So broadly, we can say the financial system comprises several components. Financial institutions are one component. Then you have the financial markets, because we have what we call money market. Money market is the market where short-term funding requirements, normally daily, weekly, the short term, it's a very short period, funding requirements are being like, there are borrowers, there are lenders, they meet and meet their short-term funding requirements. Then we have the capital market. Capital market is a market where you go for your long-term funding requirements. Like we have the maybe the stock market or the debt market, like that. Those are long-term ones. Then we can also think about foreign exchange market, where different foreign currencies as against the Sri Lankan rupees, there are certain requirements for buying and selling. So that is in the foreign exchange market. So like that, there are different markets are there in the financial system. Then there is another component that we call the financial infrastructure. For financial institutions, financial markets to operate, there is a kind of a supportive role that has to be provided. So this financial infrastructure usually comprises of the laws. There are different laws. When you are having when you operate as a financial institution, when you operate in the financial different markets, there are laws that are applicable. So we need to be mindful of those laws. Then there are rules, regulations, procedures. There are like platforms for kind of the mediums where these transactions can take. There are payment platforms. There are debt security clearing platforms. So these are, so then there are the codes, the different bylaws like that. So all these comprise the financial infrastructure. So broadly, these three components, the financial institutions, financial markets, and the infrastructure comprise our financial system. So now moving to the financial institutions, in order to get an understanding of the financial institutions, I think the best document is this particular table that is available in the annual report of the central bank, because as I explained last time, now annual report, the chapter 8, it has a very comprehensive narration about the financial system of our country, giving certain data, certain activities, how they have kind of operated during an year, sometimes what are the future changes that are expected. So like that, it's a very comprehensive the chapter. And in that chapter, if you go to the kind of the beginning, this particular table is there. I have extracted it from that annual report. So where it contains the total assets of the financial system. So normally when we want to compare the size of a financial system or financial institution, the very first thing that we try to, the criteria is the size, the asset size. So here again, we are looking at the asset size, and we can see now as at the end of 2019, 31st December 2019, the Sri Lankan financial system, the total assets is 20 trillion as against almost 19 trillion that was there 1 year before. So this is the, during the year, what it says is the total assets of the financial system has increased by about 1 trillion. Of course, the 2019 figures are still provisional figures. They may get changed as time goes, but the provisional figures indicate 20 trillion assets, Sri Lanka rupee assets in the financial system. So broadly, our financial system is categorized as stated here as the banking sector, then other deposit-taking financial institutions, then specialized financial institutions, and contractual savings institutions. So if we look at the banking sector includes the central bank also, because central bank also engage in some forms of kind of transactions with the commercial bank. Central bank does not engage in any financial transactions with individuals. Central bank has its transactions largely with the commercial banks, like to say banker to the government, banker to the banks, like that. So there are some transactions with the commercial bank. Then we have the other two categories of banks, the commercial banks and specialized banks. So if we look at like why these two categories, what are the distinct features of these two categories, I think those who are working in banks, they are well aware. In the case of commercial banks, the key difference between a commercial bank and specialized bank is, can anyone tell what it is?
Commercial bank is issuing, maintaining current accounts.
That's right. Very good. That current account. What do you mean by a current account? Current account is what we call where you can deposit that money, in an account, and there's an instrument called checks. By drawing a check, you can withdraw those money instantly, and also you can even overdraw that account. That's what we say the current account. Overdraw the account, of course, there has to be authority the approval from the bank, but there is a possibility to overdraw, which we call overdrafts. And in the case of the current accounts in Sri Lanka, we don't pay interest. It is a deposit, type of deposit where no interest is paid. It's basically like to meet your day-to-day funding requirements if you are a businessman, or if you're an individual to meet your short-term funding. So you have a checkbook where you can overdraw. So that is, of course, today this checkbook is, of course, not at all kind of in use, because you can instantly withdraw money. You can go to the ATM and withdraw money. But the traditional purpose of the current account was that. But as it was mentioned by the student, the specialized banks do not have these current accounts in their deposit category. So the key distinction, which is, of course, now that distinction is getting very blurred because the nature is now not there, because even from a savings account, you can now withdraw money instantly, but still the category of deposits are still there. What we call the current accounts, and some call it demand deposit. The word demand means then and there you can withdraw money. So that is one feature. Can you all mention another? Any other differences between a commercial bank and a specialized bank? What about the foreign exchange transactions?
But NSB given approval, no?
That's right. Yes, that is right. So broadly, commercial banks and specialized banks, the foreign exchange transactions are carried out by the commercial banks. But there is an exception. In the case of National Savings Bank, it has been given approval to engage in foreign exchange transactions. So the distinct feature is exempted for National Savings Bank. So that is the difference. Any other specialized bank currently does not engage, but again, there are some slight, for example, if we take Sanasa Development Bank, they are being given certain restraints. So I think we can tell like this, the specialized banks do not engage in the entire range of foreign exchange transactions. Certain restricted activities have been permitted to be carried out by the banks like NSB, I think even Sanasa. But they do not carry out the entire range of foreign exchange transactions that a commercial bank carries out. So that's the difference. Okay, so again, if we kind of look at the names now for banks, again within the commercial banks, we can identify, like we have state banks. What are these state banks? The banks like the two state banks, People's Bank and Bank of Ceylon. Then we have local commercial banks, that is locally incorporated, privately owned commercial banks. They are the banks like Commercial Bank, HNB, Sampath, Ceylon, Pan Asia, NDB, Union Bank. So then we have Amana Bank. So those are the locally incorporated, privately owned commercial banks. Then there is another group. What are they? Another group of commercial banks?
Foreign bank.
Bank. That's right. They are the foreign banks. Now, I explained to you last time, there is this category of overseas companies. So overseas companies are those companies, they are not incorporated in Sri Lanka. They are incorporated in another country, but having operations in Sri Lanka. So all the foreign banks are operating in Sri Lanka as overseas companies because their head offices are incorporated. Those banks are incorporated in another country and they are having branches. Examples, we have several Indian banks. Then we have a Malaysian bank. We have other UK incorporated banks, USA incorporated banks. So like that, we have several 12. Yeah, I think it's about 12. And of course, 2 banks are to be kind of cancelled their license shortly because they are going to close their business in Sri Lanka. I think these kind of short questions can come for your the first question. I want to deviate a little bit. In your paper, there is the first question where the 20 marks, those are with short questions and kind of MCQs, 5 MCQs and short questions to give short answers. So these kind of changes that happened in the system during a period are normally tested in this section. So just to kind of update that, there are 2 banks, Axis Bank and ICICI Bank. Both banks, central bank has now permitted to close operations and they are in that process of closing their operations. These are decisions made by their head office. So they will be closing their operations shortly. So other than that, all other branches that are operating here are branches of banks incorporated outside. Right. So those are the 3 broad categories that we can distinguish between the commercial banks. Then when we come to specialized banks, now as the name suggests, we can identify some specific purposes of these specialized banks. For example, now can you all kind of say some categories or some names of specialized banks?
Development banks.
Yeah, now there are development banks. Maybe now if you look at development bank, I think currently we can identify the Pradeshi Sangvardhana Bank. Now we have a bank called Pradeshi Sangvardhana Bank which is operating in the region. So that can be identified as a development bank. And also we had the bank called Lankaputra Development Bank that was recently merged with the Pradeshi Sangvardhana Bank. So that's a kind of another update. Lankaputra Development Bank, which operated as a specialized bank, was merged with the Pradeshi Sangvardhana Bank. Another kind of a specific purpose, maybe we can say savings bank. So the most savings banks, maybe I can say about 2 or 3, like NSB. NSB is one of the oldest savings bank that have been operating. Can you say any specific nature of the NSB, like any specific about the NSB?
This come the Parliament Act.
Yes. And then what does the act specifies? There is some specific kind of...
Government is liable for...
Yes. According to the NSB Act, all deposits are guaranteed by the government. It says there is a guarantee by the government. What it says is, if the bank is unable to meet the deposits, there is a government has the obligation to repay those. So NSB is the only bank that has that kind of a explicit, we call, because it's specifically stated in the law. It has a explicit guarantee on its deposits. So on the other hand, there is when there is this deposit guarantee, there is also a requirement of the deposits mobilized by the NSB. At least 60% has to be invested in what? What we call government securities, right? That is, again, I suppose that is what the intention is, because when there is a government guarantee, there also has to be a ability for the government to fulfill that guarantee. So by having this requirement that at least 60% should be invested, so you get the deposits of the general public and at least 60% is invested in the government securities. So meaning there is kind of a inbuilt safety, because what we expect is always government securities. Government will meet its own obligation, that is the sovereign. So therefore, by having this requirement of at least 60% being invested, I think what the attempt is to have an inbuilt security safety, so that whoever who manages the funds of NSB there will be a definite inbuilt safety for those funds by having a 60% at least invested in the government security. So this is a specific statutory kind of requirements in the National Savings Bank Act. So that gives a special feature, like special security for the deposits of the national savings. So that is one of the savings bank. Then also we have another bank by the name Sri Lanka Savings Bank, which I feel that also can be, as the name suggests, we can say that is a savings bank. Of course, it's a very small bank. Now, anyone can tell me how the origin of, what is the origin of this Sri Lanka Savings Bank?
Pramukha Bank.
Yes, we had a specialized bank called Pramukha Savings and Development Bank. That was a private bank, and due to certain kind of mismanagements that happened, Central Bank had to cancel the license. It happened somewhere early 2000. So for some time, the license was cancelled and that the closing operations were going on. But after some time, the government formed this kind of company. It was a company, though it was formed by as a company, not as a, though it is a fully owned bank, fully government-owned bank. It is formed as a company, Sri Lanka Savings Bank. So the bank was established and assets and liabilities of the failed Pramukha Bank was vested on this company. So currently it has some of the state. Now there was a payment scheme for a certain period to repay the deposits, and some of the deposits were converted as share capital also. Then there were certain debt obligations, so there's a time period given to repay those. So majority of it has been now paid, and bank also continue to engage in normal business operations, accepting saving deposits and kind of engaging in certain lending activities. So that bank is there. There again, certain changes happen in that bank also, because Sri Lanka Savings Bank is now a fully owned subsidiary of the National Savings Bank. That's again a recent change that happened. Sri Lanka Savings Bank is the fully owned subsidiary of National Savings Bank now. Right, even Sanasa Bank, now Sanasa Bank, Sanasa Development Bank is another specialized bank, which again we can tell that is also a savings bank, because Sanasa is mostly comprising the Sanasa societies. We have Sanasa societies. So Sanasa society deposits, and those members are mostly the depositors also of this Sanasa Bank. And it's operating at the grassroots level. So that's again a savings mobilizing bank, which also engages in specialized banking activity. So the savings is one group, then the development, and there is another group. What is that? Housing banks. There are two housing banks, State Mortgage and Investment Bank and Housing. Yeah, HDFC, what we call HDFC is Housing Development Finance Corporation Bank of Sri Lanka. So these are two banks that are concentrating on housing. That is means they are granting loans mostly for the purpose of housing requirements, and mostly those are residential, taking the properties as mortgages. And also there is this EPF, those who are kind of having the EPF, that part of that also can be used as a collateral. So these are two housing banks. So I think broadly we have identified all types, all specialized banks in these categories, right? So that's the banking sector, and you can see from the 20 trillion financial system, 14 trillion is accounted by these three categories, and the large category is the commercial bank category, which almost had 11 trillion of assets as at the end of last year. And as a percentage, it is 54%. And this banking system together accounts for about 62% of the financial system, right? Then we move to the other deposit taking now. While the commercial banks and specialized banks are accepting deposits from general public, there are a few other financial institutions also. So those are under this other deposit taking financial institution category. The first category is the licensed finance companies. It accounts for about 7% of the financial system. Then we have the cooperative rural banks and thrift and credit cooperative society. So again, with regard to the finance companies, I think there are certain changes that are happening, which again you should know. If the questions come, then you can answer. Now, most recent one, if I may update you, is about the cancellation of license of one of the finance companies. Can anyone tell me what that is? The latest finance company that the central bank had decided to cancel the license?
The finance company.
Yeah, it is the finance company. So like that, there are some changes that happened over the last 2 or 3 years. So please, you need to get yourselves updated since questions can come. There were few other companies license cancelled, like CIFL, then Standard Finance, then also, 2 companies. So these companies, the central bank has started making compensation payments from the insurance fund. Similarly, the finance also, central bank is going to start payment of insurance fund. So we need to be aware of those and get ourselves updated. Then the cooperative banks or the cooperative societies are also operating generally throughout the country. Of course, the Colombo itself, I think we don't see them much, but as we go to our suburbs and also to the rural areas, the cooperative banks are operating in a much larger way. They help the members, the cooperative banks, the societies, they have members. So they are a way of helping the members to mobilize the deposits as well as to carry out their economic activities by granting different types of loans. Then now we have discussed about different deposit taking institutions. Then we have other financial institutions, few other categories. First one being the leasing companies. Again, leasing companies account for about like very minute share of the financial system, not even 1%. Then there are primary dealer companies. We will be going through these different types, so I won't take much time to explain them what they are doing. Primary dealers are the companies that are kind of operating to carry out transactions with regard to government securities, both treasury bills and treasury bonds. Then there are companies like stockbrokers, unit trusts, different margin providers. Those are operating in the capital market, which what I mentioned as long-term, the market that provides the long-term funding. So that all those together accounts for about 1.4% of the financial system. Then the last category is the contractual savings. Now these are the companies that provide long-term funding. When the economy needs long-term funding, these different types, because these are kind of funds that are mobilized to be held for a long term. Like contractual savings means they have been collected over a period of time. So for a long term, unlike a 1-year fixed deposit or a 3-month deposit or a savings deposit that are common, because commercial banks, specialized banks normally accept deposits for short term. If you look at their the maturity patterns of the deposits, majority are maybe 1 year, 2 years. There can be a small category, like a category of about 3 or 5 years if there are products, but majority of their deposits are like 1 year to 2 year and even much shorter term. But when it comes to the contractual savings, because by nature, these are institutions or funds that we call, they are collecting funds over a long period of time to be used at a later time. So like things like EPF, ETF, so they are called the contractual savings. And they are the institutions that normally provide the long-term funding in our in any financial system, because they have the ability to maintain those funds for a long term. So that's broadly an overview of the entire financial system of the country. And I kindly request all of you to read the chapter 8 of the Central Bank Annual Report, because that gives a very comprehensive understanding about the operation of the entire financial system. Okay. So having understood the different types of institutions that are operating, I would also like to kind of inform you about how these, now I told you financial institutions are managed in a separate way. So because they are being managed by a different group of people, like the directors and the employees, the CEO and the employees, there is also a requirement to kind of ensure that they are managing the best interest of their fund providers, largely the depositors and other creditors. So in order to ensure that this management happens in the best interest and in a very prudent way, over the time there is this requirement that has been built up to have a separate group of another group of authority that we call the regulator or the supervisor, to be there in between these institutions to ensure that they are being managed, operated in the best interest of the fund providers or any other stakeholders of those institutions. So that is why we have this supervisory authority. So we have like the central bank supervising several types of financial institutions. If we look at in detail, the banks, both commercial banks and specialized banks, finance companies, leasing companies, primary dealers, and also different types of payment service providers. Then there is the Insurance Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka that will be regulating the activities of insurance companies and even the insurance brokers, insurance agents. All those are regulated under the Insurance Regulatory Commission. Then the capital market operations are regulated by the Securities Exchange Commission, broadly the types of institutions, stockbrokers, unit trusts, investment companies, margin providers, underwriters, and even the stock exchanges. Stock exchanges also should come. Of course, Sri Lanka, we have only one stock exchange that is also regulated by the Securities and Exchange Commission. And the other group, the cooperatives and the thrift and credit cooperative societies are, I would say, we can't say they are really regulated, but their activities are kind of looked into by the cooperative developer, because there is a slight difference in the way they are operating. At the moment, the cooperative development department does not have a specific power to regulate or supervise, but they are kind of issuing certain instructions and carrying out some form of supervision and all that, but they are in the process of doing certain changes to get this supervisory and regulatory authority. And with regard to the cooperatives, now all cooperatives and TCs are not only managed by the Cooperative Development Department, because after the 13th Amendment to our Constitution, there were certain functions that were carried out by the central government were decentralized, and cooperatives is one function that has been decentralized. So if you kind of look at the different portfolios that are in a provincial council, we can see there is also a provincial minister for cooperatives. So that is because this cooperative function is now decent. So any cooperative that has been set up after the 13th Amendment to our Constitution will not be set up under the central government Cooperative Development Department. It is set up under the cooperative ministry or the cooperative commissioner of that particular, the relevant provincial council. So therefore, since the 13th Amendment, cooperatives can be either directly supervised or regulated, not supervision or regulation, maybe under the Cooperative Development Department, or if it was after 13th Amendment, it will be under the specific Provincial Cooperative Commission. So therefore now in Sri Lanka we have this kind of a multi-regulatory authority system. So there are few regulatory authorities regulating or supervising different types of financial institutions. So it's a multi-regulatory system in Sri Lanka, but some countries, they have only single supervisor. That is also another way of supervising financial institutions, having a single supervisor. So for example, a country like Korea, they have a single supervisor who is kind of supervising all types of financial institutions. So this was a new development that happened some time ago in our financial institution supervision framework. So some countries have moved to a system where all the supervision or regulation of financial institutions are carried by one entity. But in Sri Lanka, we are still practicing this multi-supervisory system with regard to financial institutions. Okay, now let us look at the commercial banks and specialized banks. Here what I'm trying to kind of explain is how they have been set up, because as I said, we learned how a company is kind of incorporated. Now we need to, in this lesson, what you're trying to understand is how these different types of financial institutions are established. To start with, I want to say now I have kind of specified certain things here as a general procedure, but of course if someone really wants to set up or establish, I advise you to always visit the relevant websites, the relevant regulators' websites, and see what are the specific requirements, because these changes, these requirements can be changed or updated by the specific supervisor from time to time. So therefore, if you are really wanting to get an updated or detailed information, please refer to the particular website of the relevant supervisor, and you can get an update information about these requirements. So moving to the banks now, again, with regard to different types of financial institutions, there are specific acts that have been, connected with the regulatory and supervisory function. So it is very important as students or as employees in the banking and financial sector for us to be familiar about these different statutes also that are governing the financial institutions, because if we don't know the specific law and if we kind of disregard certain requirements under certain specific laws, then that will bring about a legal risk. For example, now those who are in the banking sector, there is something called banking secrecy. That is, you cannot, now when you are working in a bank, you tend to get a lot of information. You even come to know a lot of personal, private information about your individual customers. Because if you are to get a good understanding about the customer, if you are to assess his kind of ability to pay deposit, ability to pay certain loans, how he is getting his income, you need to have certain private information, personal information relating to these customers. So the banking secrecy specifies that just because you get that information, you can use it only for the purpose of carrying out your, performing your duty as a bank employee. And there are certain other instances, exemptions given where you can divert. If it is required by another act, if there's like tax requirement, there are certain exemptions, but other than that, you cannot divulge any of this information that you come to know about a particular customer, a particular institution, or any particular transaction to anyone. So that's the banking secrecy. So if you are not familiar with that requirement, and if you kind of maybe share some information with someone that you have not permitted to share that information, then you are undertaking a legal risk. And I think there is the practice when you start work in any bank, you have to sign a secrecy. There is a secrecy declaration that you undertake to abide by the secrecy provisions. So that is again a requirement that comes from the Banking Act. So like that, there are several. Now, there are certain approvals that you need to get if you are to undertake certain activities. most of these laws specified what are the activities that a particular bank can carry out. So therefore, it is very important when you are working in a particular financial institution for you to be familiar with the particular governing law. There will be many. There are many now. For example, if you take banks, Banking Act is the key statute, but there are others also. Like for example, there can be certain inland revenue requirements. There are things specifically like the Financial Transaction Reporting Act. Then there are like payment requirements, Payment and Settlement Act. So like that, there are other ancillary acts also, but Banking Act is the key statute that governs the operations and certain operations and even requirements of the banks. Similar to other institutions also, we will come to know them as we go along. So this Banking Act specifies what is the business of a bank and also how a bank can be set up. So broadly, there is a requirement to provide an application. There will be an assessment done by the central bank and a provisional approval given, and after that a license. So if we look at like how it is happening, there are certain documents that have to be provided. Now again, you don't really need to, I have not seen any specific questions coming along these procedures in a lengthy manner, but it is important to understand why central bank requires these requirements to be informed in an application when it wants to issue a license. That is what is important to know. But I don't expect, I haven't seen any questions, and it may not be necessary for you to kind of really by heart these things. So if you look at this information, first of all, as we learned, for any company, there is a group of people called promoters. Those who get this idea, yes, we can set up a bank. We'll set up a bank for this purpose or for the other purpose. So like that, there's a group of people who come together whom we call promoter. So first of all, we need to know who are these people, because then only we can understand why they are expecting to have this bank. Then, as in the case of a company, who are the directors and major shareholders? Here, these shareholders are very important, because in the case of a bank, you have to have an initial capital. So to provide that capital, there should be people who have the capacity, who have the ability, the financial ability to put that. For example, now if you take a commercial bank, the capital requirement really as of the end of this year was 10 billion. So if we have to have that, 20. So that, of course, now we have given time to have that. There is a certain postponement because of the current COVID situation and because the difficulties that the banks have faced. But otherwise, that is a big amount of funding that is required. So if there is the shareholder should be in a position to provide that capital for that purpose. Therefore, central bank would want to know who are the major shareholders who will contribute to the capital. Then objectives about the capital, how is structured. Then maybe the CVs, what kind of the qualifications, experience will be there for the designated CEO, the senior management. Then what are the kind of technological situations, like now currently we have a lot of automated processes. So if a new bank is coming, they have to come with these automated processes. We can't go for manual process. So we need to know what kind of automation, technological status this particular bank is going to be. So in order to assess all that, this information is requested by any prospective promoter that they wish to have a bank. Once this information is provided, in addition to this, the articles. Now, we learned about the article last week. What we said, articles contain the internal operations, like how they are going to conduct their internal operations. Things like capital, their objectives, the business operations, then about shareholding, the appointment of directors, all that is there in the articles. Then statement containing the details of the CEO and the directors. If it is an already established company, about their financial operations for the past 3 years. Then the business, the feasibility, there is also a requirement for a feasibility to see projections, because once a company is set up, how they are going to operate, because there has to be some time initial time where it will not be a very viable operation, but after a certain period, the company, the bank should start generating profits and becoming a viable company. So in order to understand how long this is going to take and how they are going to come into this break-even position, the prospective investor should provide, prospective bank should provide with a financial feasibility containing the projections also. So those are some of the documents and information required by a prospective applicant to get a banking license. Now that is for the case of a company that is going to be incorporated. But if it is a company that is going to be a company that is incorporated outside, then there are some additional documents. So those are, the first one is, now that is in the case of a foreign bank. The first one is, there has to be an undertaking given by the head office. That is, there is the head office. The head office board of directors will give an undertaking that if there is any difficulty faced in the local branch, the head office will provide all the requirements that are requested by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. So what it says is, if the local bank is unable to meet the deposit obligations on demand by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, the head office will provide that funding. Basically, that's what this undertaking will provide. So that's kind of a, we take it as a legal documentation, because that undertaking has to be supported by a resolution passed by the board of directors. So once the board of directors of that head office pass the resolution and provide this undertaking, it's kind of a legal binding document that will enable the central bank to make any claims in case the local branch face some funding difficulties. And also a second document is the approval of the particular regulatory authority in the country of incorporation. Now, if, for example, if we take any Indian bank, if an Indian bank wants to come and set up a branch in Sri Lanka, they have to get the approval of the regulator in that country, that is the Reserve Bank of India. Like the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is the Reserve Bank of India. So there are documents for application for a banking license should be accompanied with a approval of the Reserve Bank of India also. So these are two additional documents if it is if the application is submitted by a branch, submitted by a overseas company. Overseas, the company incorporated outside Sri Lanka. So once those documents are received, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka will assess them. Now, in the case of a banking license, these assessments are carried out by what's the department that handles the banking functions, the licensing and regulations. There is the department called the Bank Supervision Department. Director of Bank Supervision is the head of the department. So the assessments are carried out by the Bank Supervision Department, and there are criteria. Now these criteria are specified in the kind of the Banking Act as well as the requirements that are seen. So the most important thing the Banking Act specifies is there has to be a requirement. In other case, a need. The need of the country. There should be a banking need for the country. If there is no space, now for example, today we have a large number of banks in our country. So if a new bank is coming to get a new license, they must justify that they are going to provide some banking need that is not currently provided. Because otherwise no point having another bank just carrying out the same banking functions. For example, if they are also going to come and provide the trade finances, just provide the normal banking operations that are carried by all other banks in the country, Central Bank can take up the position that there is no real need for that kind of another bank to come. So unless there is some specific kind of new business area that is going to be kind of provided or facilitated by a new license, then Central Bank may not accept a banking license, a new bank at this moment. So therefore, Central Bank also has to be satisfied there is a specific need in the national economy for a new entrant to come. So it will also look at the validity of these documents. What is the financial status? Because as I said, to provide the necessary capital. And once the capital is put, if there are going to be further increases in capital, there has to be a capacity, or they should have the ability to raise new capital. Then the suitability of those who are going to become the directors, what kind of a CEO they are going to take, who will be the other kind of officers, whether they will have the necessary experiences, whether they are going to get people with the specific capabilities, expertise, so that the bank can operate in a successful manner. So these are the assessments the central bank will do in order to identify whether the particular applicant is suitable to receive a new banking license. So once the assessment is done, then the first step is, as I mentioned earlier, to issue the provisional approval. So there is what we call the letter of provisional approval. If the central bank feels that this applicant appears to be kind of acceptable to issue a banking license, so in the first instance, it's an approval in principle. The central bank will issue a provisional approval, letter of provisional approval. So once a letter of provisional approval is issued, the applicant should be get prepared with the other requirements. Now, sometimes what happens is they don't really set up a company. They come with the draft documents, because once you set up the company and apply for a license, and in case the central bank does not accept the application, then of course, you not worth having the company being incorporated. So in that kind of a situation, we have seen in recent times, and also the Act also provides for it, you can come with the draft documents and get a preliminary approval, this letter of provisional approval, and then after that set up the company. So the incorporation, the kind of directors, then appointing the CEO, raising the capital, these things can happen after the letter of provisional approval takes place. So there is a time given for the letter of provisional approval, because if during that time, if it doesn't happen, then the letter of provisional approval will get cancelled. Usually it's 12 months, and there is also a possibility to extend it to a further time. But during that time, the terms and conditions that have to be fulfilled in the letter, according to the letter of provisional approval, has to be satisfied by the applicant. So once, and another thing is, this letter of provisional approval is not at all a license. So by using, just once you get a letter of provisional approval, you are not supposed to commence any banking operations. And it has to be always mentioned in whatever the documents that you provide for any other, maybe to the Register General of Companies, or to set up the business, the place, you have to say you are only still having a letter of provisional approval. When the central bank is issuing a letter of provisional approval, it will also provide a copy to the Register General of Companies also, to inform that this is a letter of provisional approval. So if the requirements of the letter of provisional approval has been kind of fulfilled, and the central bank, the monetary board, is satisfied that the applicant is now ready to receive the license, then central bank will decide to issue the license. But it can also reject. Just because it issued the letter of provisional approval, it is not binding on the monetary board to issue the final license. So whatever the reasons, if there are reasons, monetary board can always decide, even though they have issued the letter of provisional approval, that they are not going to proceed with the issue of the license. Okay. So when the license is to be issued, it is important that it's not only the monetary board, it is also necessary to get the approval of the minister. Now, currently it is the Minister of Finance. The banking license is issued with the approval of the minister. So two approvals are needed. The monetary board has to approve it, and also the minister has to approve. So with both approval only, a banking license can be issued. So that is again because of the importance of a bank, and also the connections that it has with the government and also the central bank. These requirements are there. So when the license is issued, the license will specify what are the authorized business. It will say that it is allowed to carry out the banking business, what we call the domestic banking business and offshore banking business. In Sri Lanka, we have divided the banking with special in the commercial banking. There are two units called domestic banking unit and offshore banking unit. Offshore banking unit is kind of a specific unit that has been created for export-oriented BOI companies and also the non-residents to do certain business. Now, really speaking, today there is not much of a specific difference between the domestic banking unit and the offshore banking unit, but initially there were certain kind of relaxations. There were tax concessions and also even the regulatory requirements, like things like liquidity requirements, capital requirements were not applicable to this offshore banking because it was intended to promote the BOI companies, the non-residents to engage in banking activities with the banks. So therefore, in order to promote such businesses, there were certain relaxations in the offshore banking business. So due to that reason, even today we have these two units. If you take a commercial bank, any commercial bank, we have the two units that we call domestic banking unit and the offshore banking. So these authorized businesses, in the case of a commercial banking unit, it will specify whether it is only domestic banking or domestic banking and offshore bank. If it is a specialized bank, it will say it's the specialized bank, the domestic. And the places where the bank can be operated. Now the license will say the place. And the terms, and there are certain terms and conditions that may have been imposed, especially after 2005. I think the old banking licenses, they do not have terms and conditions, but with the amendment in 2005, this additional requirement was placed where the Monetary Board can have certain terms and conditions attached to the banking license. So these are the three specific information that will be available in a banking license. So now with regard to places, it is important to understand now bank cannot have any business place if it doesn't have the approval of the central bank. Currently, the law is in order to have any form of a business place, the approval of the central bank is required. Really the access, the prior approval of the Monetary Board, but for kind of administrative convenience, certain delegations have been provided currently by the Monetary Board, but still approval of the central bank is needed. So without prior approval of the central bank, a bank cannot operate in a premises. So for example, if you are kind of going into work in a particular branch, it is, or you are going to operate a banking business in some place, definitely you need to know whether the central bank approval has been received to carry out banking business in that particular premises. Without that, you cannot, and it is then a legal violation of the Banking Act provisions. Now, very importantly, this license has to be displayed in all business premises. It is very important that license is displayed in all business premises. So I request the students who are working in banks, please, if you have not seen your banking license yet, please see that it is kind of displayed in a place. Now this license is displayed for those who come to the bank to see it, not for safekeeping in a cabinet or in a drawer in the manager's room or anywhere, but the license is the document that that general public who visit the business premises should first know that this particular entity is a authorized entity to engage in banking business. So for that, for general public to know that, the banking license has to be displayed in a place where it can be prominently seen. Now, for example, I think if you go to a pharmacy, we can see there is a specific kind of a license which says this has a pharmacist given a name under whose name this place is operated. So that is to say they have the specific approval to operate the pharmacy. Otherwise, it's not a duly authorized place. And if we kind of go to such place and take medicine, I think we are running a risk of our health risk. So similarly, any public should be able to know whether the particular entity that it has visited to engage in banking business is an authorized entity. So how he comes to know about this is by seeing this banking license. Therefore, the license has to be displayed in a place that can be conspicuously seen by the general public who visit. So once you go back to your office, please have a look at it and see what I mentioned here, the business, the place, and the terms and conditions in the new ones. There won't be terms and conditions in the older ones because that requirement was not there, but more recently established ones will also have the terms and conditions. So to get yourself familiar with the banking license. So then now once you receive the license only, that entity can carry out banking business. So the birth of the company will happen with the certificate of incorporation. Then carrying out a banking business can happen only upon the receipt of the banking license. So once the banking license is issued, normally within 9 months from the issue of the banking license, it is expected to commence business. The company that received the banking license is required to commence business within 9 months from the date of the banking license. Okay, then we can see what are the businesses. Now I told the Banking Act governs the operations of the banks. So Banking Act also specifies what are the businesses that a bank can carry out. And these businesses are specified in 2 schedules. If you go to the end of the Banking Act, there are some schedules, and the Schedule 2 and Schedule 4 are the 2 schedules that specify the activities. Schedule 2 specifies the activities that a commercial bank can undertake, and Schedule 4 specifies, there is a typo here, the Schedule 2 and 4 of the Banking Act, the F has to come. The Schedule 2 and 4. Schedule 4 specifies the permitted businesses of the bank, the specialized banks. So again, as I said, if you want to know whether a specific activity that you are going to carry out, for example, now taking deposits, accepting deposits, granting loans, those are normal activities that a bank would do. But something specific, something different, if you are supposed to do or if you are going to undertake, you need to be sure first whether that is a permitted business. So the first document that you should refer to is the Schedule 2 in the case of a commercial bank, or Schedule 4 in the case of a specialized bank. There is a list given. So in that list, the specific activity that you are going to carry out, especially when it comes to specialized banks, there are certain specific things. So if you are going to engage in something that is not specific, you will have to get special approval. For example, pawnbroking. Pawnbroking is not an activity specifically mentioned in the specialized banking activities. So any specialized bank that's going to engage in pawnbroking should get specific approval. So for that purpose, in both these schedules, the last item which it says any other activity approved by the central bank. So therefore, if a particular bank wants to engage in some activity other than that, those are listed in these 2 schedules, under this particular final item, they can come and get approval if they are related to the banking business. As central bank will go through it and provide. So that is how especially the specialized banks, when they want to undertake the pawnbroking, it has been carried out under this provision. That's discretion to the central bank if we are to provide that kind of activity. Then that is the bank per se, what the bank can undertake. But also now if we take a company, we know it can undertake certain operations, certain activities by the company itself. And also we have another form. We can set up a subsidiary or an associate, that is a connected company. Now, what is a subsidiary? Subsidiary is a company that is owned by one company. There is a majority ownership, more than 50%. In the case of a banking subsidiary, the Banking Act has defined what a subsidiary is. According to the Banking Act, the subsidiaries are identified in 3 forms. The first one is the normal accounting definition, that is ownership of more than 50%. There is also another category which says if the subsidiary of the bank owns more than 50%. This is normally we call it the sub-subsidiary, because if the subsidiary is owning 50 more, if it is a subsidiary and subsidiary owns more than 50%, what we can kind of tell, we can look at what we call the indirect shareholding. So it is not a direct shareholding from the company, from the bank, but there is a indirect shareholding, because bank is owning more than 50% of the subsidiary and subsidiary is owning more than 50% of the other company. So then there is an indirect holding of the bank of the second company more than 50%. So that is also identified as a subsidiary in the Banking Act. So that's the second form. Then the third form of the subsidiary according to the Banking Act is where the management is controlled by the bank. So what it says is, even if the bank is not having ownership more than 50%, if the management is controlled by the bank, that is also another form where the Banking Act recognizes it as a subsidiary. Now it can happen like this. For example, there is the bank, Bank A, and there is a company X. So this Bank A, we'll say owning about 30% of company X. So really speaking, it is not a subsidiary. But the company X in the director board, there are 7 directors and 5 directors are representing the bank. So that is the way where they have the management control, because out of 7 directors in the company, 5 are representing the bank. So in that way, there is a control to the bank for this company, even though they don't have that shareholding, share ownership, still there is a manager. So this form of this having the management control is also recognized as another form of subsidiary in the banking. So there are 3 ways that the Banking Act recognizes subsidiaries: the normal accounting definition of owning more than 50%, then that indirect share ownership of 50%, subsidiary having a subsidiary, then that is also identified as a subsidiary of a bank, and the third one is where the bank has the management control. So all this. So subsidiary is one way where a bank can carry out businesses, and the other one is the associate. Associate has this normal accounting meaning where ownership of the bank is at least like between 20 to 50%. So that's the associate. So by forming a subsidiary or associate, also the commercial banks and special commercial banks can carry on activities. Now here the Act provides the bank to carry on a subsidiary as another bank. That is permitted in the law itself. A commercial bank can have another bank as a subsidiary. I don't know why it is really there. It doesn't really serve a specific purpose, but of course the Act has provided. But apart from that, there are other exemptions, like for training or relating to the banking, accountancy, and those other specified areas, they can have a company. Then for hire purchase transactions, certain long-term credit funding, they can have a subsidiary or an associate. For leasing, then consultancy, then due to loan default. Now sometimes it happens, banks have granted loans, and after some time, if the loans are getting defaulted, a way of kind of recovering is bank will kind of get an ownership of that company in order to subsequently recover the loans. So in that kind of a situation also, Banking Act provides to have this kind of subsidiary. And finally, there is also the ability to have a subsidiary or an associate to carry on some business that is not inconsistent with the provision of finance. So if the particular business of a proposed subsidiary or associate is not kind of inconsistent with the business of the bank, then the central bank will grant approval. That has to be carried out with the approval of the central bank. So these are instances where certain activities can be carried out by the bank by forming a subsidiary or associate. So the two schedules will specify what are the particular either the commercial bank or the specialized bank can carry out. So in addition, the Banking Act also provides the certain subsidiaries and associates to be carried out to undertake certain specified businesses. So any other thing, any other business that are not covered by the Banking Act cannot be carried out by a bank licensed by the central bank. That is what it means. Any queries or comments that are there up to now or clarifications? Okay, then let's proceed.
No.
Yes.
No.
Right. Okay. So then coming to now, what is this bank? Because bank is engaged in banking business. So the Banking Act kind of says what the banking business means. So very importantly, it has to receive funds. Now, any bank, we know what if we say the core business. The core business of a bank is receiving funds and lending those funds, because that is the intermediary function. So banking business is defined as business of receiving funds from the general public. Now here, to distinguish between the two categories of banks, commercial banks and specialized banks. In the case of commercial banks, banking business is acceptance of money deposits payable upon demand. Now that is how that current accounts or the demand deposits have been identified. The function of having the current accounts or the demand deposits is identified by these wordings here, which says acceptance of money deposits payable upon demand and demand. So that is the demand deposit or the current account function, and those funds will be either given as loans or used for investment purposes in whole or part. So that's the two sides of the intermediary function. That is what is identified as banking business. When it comes to the specialized banks, the definition excludes the demand deposit part. It says business of accepting deposits of money and investing and lending such money. So that payable upon demand component is not there when it comes to the banking business definition of the specialized bank. So this is the core business. Now, why that is important is, now sometimes there is a tendency for people to come and ask for banking license when they are really not going to do a business mobilizing deposits. For example, we get sometimes requests to the central bank. It says we have some money, we want to do some lending activities, we want to get a license as a bank. But by definition, that cannot happen, because banking business entails, it's a core requirement, core function of a banking business to have the deposit mobilizing aspect. So unless there is a deposit mobilization from the general public, there is no way that a banking license can be granted. Now, for example, now we have this what we call credit institutions. Now the microfinance, the majority of the microfinance institutions, sometimes they are not really mobilizing public deposits. It is the lending aspect that creates this kind of the deposit mobilized. So there is a small kind of confusion whether they also form as part of the banking. They don't, because it's not a public deposit mobilization in certain cases. Now, certain microfinance institutions are definitely mobilizing public deposits. They will fall under the definition, but there are also a group of institutions that are operating where they are only lending institutions. They are not mobilizing deposits, but they are lending institutions. So these lending institutions do not fall within the category of commercial banks or specialized banks, because one of the core function is the mobilization of funds from the general public. Okay, so who are authorized to kind of accept deposits and lend and invest money? Now, in the Banking Act, which recognizes banking business as the business of the banks, says identifies different categories. So definitely commercial banks, specialized banks. It also identifies finance companies, then building societies. We have what that we call National Housing Act. Under that, there is a category of institutions called building societies. I think as far as I'm aware, currently we don't have these building societies operating as of now, because earlier we had one under the Selinco group, but that is also not operating now. Then cooperative societies, they are authorized, and there are non-profit organizations which can accept deposits from the members, but with the prior written approval of the Monetary Board. Now, such institutions can, but those are
Vision Fund.
sorry.
Vision Fund.
Yes, yeah. So they have to be the members. There are members now. For example, if we take maybe even like some things like welfare funds, if they are mobilizing deposits from the members, then there is the requirement that they have to be registered with the prior approval of the Monetary Board. So I think what this try to say is, now when you mobilize deposits from the general public, there is an obligation to ensure those funds are managed carefully and returned. So to ensure that, there are licensing requirements for commercial banks, specialized banks, finance companies. So cooperatives are also kind of administered or maybe managed in a different way. So the other small non-profit organizations also require prior approval of the central bank if they are to. But I know there are small like welfare societies and those things are debt donation, debt societies, those things are operating. But of course, the law says non-profit making organizations that accept deposits only from its registered members have to obtain prior written approval of the Monetary Board. So what the law tries to say is, who are authorized to accept deposits from general public under what circumstances. That is what this tries to specify, because of the importance of the deposit mobilization function. Okay. Then the word bank. Now again, there are certain restrictions, because now anybody, like any entity or any individual, cannot just use the word bank and maybe put a kind of a notice board or whatever, say XYZ bank or ABC bank or whatever, and start some business operation. That is not permitted. It is only a bank that is licensed as a commercial bank or a specialized bank can use the word bank in their name. And in the case of a licensed bank, it is compulsory that they use part of the word bank, either the bank or any other derivative that arising from it in their name. It is compulsory. They have to have that word bank or banking or whatever, the word deriving out of the word bank in the name. It is compulsory. They cannot dispense out of it. They have to. But any others, there are certain exemptions. Other than that, anyone else is going to use the word bank as in order to kind of specify their business, they have to get prior approval of the central bank, and it is very restricted. Central bank will not give that approval, because now the idea is this. Now when you use the word bank, it gives a kind of a understanding to the general public that they are kind of registered, licensed and managed by the central bank, because largely the word bank is used in the names only by these licensed banks. So if there is another company that uses the word bank without this authority, that misrepresents the business. It will give the idea to somebody that this is also an authorized institution to mobilize public deposits. So therefore, to avoid that misrepresentation, the law very strictly restricts anyone who is not authorized. If you are to use the word bank for anything other than for the banking business, you have to get prior approval. And normally, normally central bank is giving this approval very restrictive. There are only very few instances where central bank has permitted the use of the word bank in a very restrictive manner. There are so many kind of conditions applied to that kind of approval in order to ensure it doesn't give a wrong understanding to the general public who comes to do some business with that kind of a entity that is using the word bank, which is not really a licensed commercial bank or a licensed specialized bank. So the whole idea is, if you are a licensed bank, you have to use the word bank in your name, the word bank or any derivative. But if you are not a bank, you are not permitted to use. That's the broad idea of this. There is one exemption in the case of the use of the word bank in a licensed bank, in the case where if it is a foreign bank and if that name of the foreign bank doesn't have the word bank in the name, they are exempted from using the name in their bank even in Sri Lanka. Can anyone give me an example for that, such where the name word bank is not there in the foreign bank? Currently, there are no such banks in Sri Lanka. All banks operating, foreign banks operating in Sri Lanka, has some derivative out of the word bank. But some time ago, we had a French bank by the name Société Générale. Now, in that name, there is no word there's no bank in their name. So even in Sri Lanka, they operated under the name Société Générale. It's a French bank, and they did not have to have the word bank in their name. So that is the exemption. But otherwise, any licensed bank should have. So the whole idea is to ensure the general public who transact business with the bank knows whether it is a licensed bank. So that's the idea. There are some exemptions that are given where the word bank can be used. So those are like in the case of a subsidiary, if it is an association for the protection of the bank's interest, then the trade unions, and there are some exemptions again under the Montreal Law Act. So these are the exemptions. Otherwise, any other person, if they want to use the word bank in the name of their business, they have to get prior approval. Okay, so that is broadly how a bank is established, what kind of information that is required, and broadly the operation of the bank. So this is specified in the Banking Act. So similarly, there will be similar requirements when it comes to other types of institutions also. I would not go into that kind of, I would not take detail, the long time to explain, because now I explained the banks, but I will take you through the slides, and slides have some information, and also you can refer to the websites if you need some specific information about the procedures that are to be followed. Okay, now we'll come to the finance companies. So as I mentioned earlier, the finance companies currently account for about 7% of the financial system of our country. So the law that governs the finance companies is Finance Business Act of 2011. This replaced one of the old acts that we had, the Finance Companies Act. So there are some amendments that have taken place, and broadly the licensing criteria is almost similar to banks. So there are certain requirements that they have to be fulfilled. Then who can undertake now the business that they carry out? Finance company is identified as finance business. It's almost similar to the definition of the banking business, apart from the demand deposit taking, because they don't take demand deposits. But otherwise, it's almost same if you look at this definition. The accepting deposits, lending, investments, all that is there. Then the basic requirements, it has to be a company, a public company, not only a guarantee. We can't have a guarantee company. You could remember what a guarantee company is. Then it can't be a private company. It cannot be an offshore company or an overseas company also. So meaning finance companies cannot be set up as like branches. So it has to be a company incorporated in Sri Lanka. Then these are the documents, almost similar documents, and there are some more additional documents because of the specific nature, like things like organization chart, the manual of operations. Now, what is the manual of operations? It is a document which specifies how business operations are carried out. Because now in a institution like a financial institution, those who are carrying out the business cannot kind of do things like just freely the way they want. If you take any particular activity, normally how you are conducting that activity is documented. For example, if you are looking at lending, if it's about granting loans, and there is what we call the credit manual, or there is a procurement manual, or there will be a treasury manual. So like that, there are different types of documents which will lay down how you should conduct that particular action, particular operation. So manual of operations is also broadly a document like that, which will say all operations of a finance company, how they are being carried out. So the central bank requires the entity to inform this in advance. So that is to see whether the organization of different activities in a particular, the proposed finance company is going to happen in a proper way. So the central bank will go through this document and see whether the business operations of the proposed finance company is going to take place in a way that is acceptable, or are there any kind of lapses that they have not been addressed. In that case, they will want them to be included. So like that, prior to giving license itself, the central bank is requiring this manual of operation broadly to get an idea whether they are going to operate in a proper manner once the finance company is set up. So these are additional information. So once the information is received, like in the case of a bank, those will be again processed. Now, in the case of finance companies, the central bank department is the Department of Supervision of Non-Bank Financial Institutions. That department only kind of carries out work relating to the non-bank financial institutions. So finance companies fall within that department, and there is a director who heads the department. So the Act also provides that they can carry out certain investigations. If they want to assess the suitability, certain investigations can also be carried out. So similar to a bank, there are certain criteria that have been looked into when the assessment is done for the suitability. So if the department is satisfied, if the department is satisfied with the application, with the proposed functioning, and also the directors and the other kind of senior management that they've been kind of identified, so then they will peruse the application, and similar to a bank, a provisional approval is granted. Again, subject to certain terms and conditions. So if these terms and conditions are being complied with, then only the license will be issued. So similar to a bank, this is not there is no binding on the monetary board to issue the license. Just because the provisional approval is granted, it is not binding. It is valid for 18 months. And during that time, they have to kind of fulfill the terms and law. They cannot start the finance business. Finance business can be started only after the issue of a license. So they cannot start any business, but they have to do those preparatory work and inform the central bank that they have satisfied the terms and conditions of the provisional approval in order to obtain the license. So when the license is issued, there will be a public notice. In the case of finance companies, the Act requires the central bank to issue a public notice. Now, what is the purpose of the public notice? That is to inform the general public. Now, I think you can remember when a company is incorporated, there is a requirement in the Companies Act that there has to be a public notice by the company giving the name and the number and the kind of the object. So similarly, in the case of a finance company, the central bank, the monetary board, will issue a public notice to say, inform the general public a particular company by this name has been licensed to carry on finance business. Again, there are restrictions in the use of the word finance. Every finance company should use the word finance or any derivative out of it. And any other person has to get approval from the central bank to use the word finance. subject to certain exemptions. There are certain exemptions as specified here, but otherwise, without approval, anyone cannot use the word finance in a name of a business. So again, it's the same, like similar to the using the word bank. If someone uses the word finance, again that can give a understanding, kind of a view to the person, general public, that this particular company using the word finance, this may be a company authorized by the central bank to conduct finance business. So to avoid that kind of a misunderstanding or miscommunication, so there is a requirement. You are not allowed to use the word finance without prior approval. Now, regarding this monetary board, I want to tell you the monetary board is the decision-making board of the central bank. Like a board of directors in a company, the decision-making board of the central bank is the monetary board. So that is why most of these approvals are to be granted by the monetary board. Again, similar to a bank, there are certain exemptions also given, like the associations, then the trade unions, then those who are providing education. For example, anyone providing educational or consultancies relating to finance business, they are allowed to use only for that purpose. Now, for example, if someone is going to mobilize kind of deposits and then provide education, they cannot use the word, because if it is only for education, exclusive provider of education or consulting service, so that has to be fulfilled there. They can use the word finance. Right, so that is finance companies. Then moving to the finance leasing business, again, this is also a kind of activity that is again regulated by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Now, finance leasing is normally carried out by banks and finance companies, but there are also few companies that are only engaging in leasing, and they are known as registered leasing establishments. But currently we have only very few, because we had maybe a larger number of specialized leasing companies earlier, but gradually most of them have now become finance companies, and only we have very few. I think it's about 4 or 6 companies now that are operating as only as specialized leasing companies. But any company to engage in finance leasing activity, finance leasing, they have to get this registration from the central bank. For example, even a commercial bank, if the commercial bank wants to engage in finance leasing, then they have to get the separate registration from the central bank. And again, this registration is also done by the non-bank financial institution department. The department that is supervising non-bank financial institutions is only carrying on activities relating to the finance leasing business. So therefore, anyone who wishes to engage will have to get the register. We don't call it a license, it's a registration. So what is finance leasing business? Why is it different now? Again, leasing is also a form of providing finances. But what is the difference here? What is the difference? Difference is there is an involvement of an equipment. This equipment is what it makes the finance, because it's not just lending money. There is an involvement of an equipment. So there is an equipment, and then the investing money is also there. So because of that, it is different from the normal lending activities, finance leasing. And this the central bank regulations fall only to the finance leasing business. Now, there is another type called operating leases. Operating leases are not subject to the central bank supervision and regulation. In a finance leasing operation, we can identify 2 parties broadly, that is the lessor and the lessee. So lessor is the company that provides the asset, and the lessee is the company that receives the asset and uses the asset. So lessee uses the asset for his business operations, and lessor provides the asset for the lessee. So for providing that asset, what happens? In return, the lessee is making a payment, which we call the lease rental. So that is the lending activity that happens. So in the case of a finance leasing, the lending activity happens. There is an equipment that is being lent. For in return to the receiving the equipment, the lessee provides a periodic lease rental to the financial institution. So during the use of that asset, the lessee will pay the financial leases, the rental we call. So that is the lending activity with regard to the leasing operation. So there is this equipment. The equipment is the asset that is provided by the financial institution to the lessee, and lessee will provide periodic lease rentals to the lessor. Generally, these leases are for a period of 12. It should be at least for the 12-month period, and monthly payments are happening. And there is a contract between the lessor and the lessee to carry out this act. The lease contract is there. And with regard to the ownership, what happens is the lessor has the ownership. That is the financial institution, either the bank or the leasing company or the finance company owns the asset. But the lessee gets the possession, that is to use, the right to use, but that is what we call the right to use is given. The right to use is given by the lessor to the lessee. So that is possession. Ownership is with the lessor, the financial institution, and lessee gets the possession. So over the period of the lease, the lessee can use the equipment, and at the end of the period, it is expected to be returned back to the lessor in good condition. So that is the normal leasing contract. What is the law that governs the financial leasing business? It is the Finance Leasing Act of 2000. There have been some amendments subsequently. All the finance leasing operations have to be registered under this act and governed by the provisions of the act. So apart from the lessor and the lessee, sometimes there is another party to this, depending on how the equipment is obtained. So lessor is the person who transfers the right to possession and use of the equipment under the lease agreement. Lessor is the financial institution. So financial institution has the ownership of that equipment. Financial institution, by entering into the lease agreement, transfers the right to use it, what we call the possession, to the lessee. So lessee is the person who acquires the right to possess, the right to use it from the lessor, that particular equipment under the lease agreement. And sometimes there is this supplier. If the lessee is not the supplier, then there is a third party from whom the lessee would require the lessor to obtain the equipment. So then that supplier also comes to the scene. If not, it is only two parties, the lessor and the lessee. So in the agreement, according to the the Lease Act, there are certain specifics that have been mentioned that should be there in the lease agreement between the lessor and lessee, which I have listed here, like how the possession and the use. The initial period, the law says it should be at least for 1 year. Then the specific equipment. It has to be very specifically stated what are the specific. Now, for example, if there is a serial number, the color, even if you can give the diameters, and maybe like if there are certain metal types, what are those metal types? So as much as possible, the information to identify this equipment, because otherwise sometimes there is a possibility this equipment can get changed, or there can be kind of certain deviations from what the the equipment that has been provided. So in order to avoid that kind of uncertainties arising after some time, the law says specifications have to be given in the lease agreement. Then who is providing the equipment, whether it's by the supplier or by the lessor. Then the payments, and also the lessee cannot terminate the lease agreement beforehand. Once he starts using the equipment, it has to be continued for the lease period. So like that, the amounts, how they are calculating the lease amounts, then what is the period, and also to say this is not a hire purchase agreement. The hire purchase is different. Now, for example, if you look at hire purchase, now we know a lot of consumer goods are kind of obtained by consumers as hire purchase. Now, what is the difference between a hire purchase agreement and a lease agreement? Is a lease agreement similar to hire purchase agreement? No, because in the case of a hire purchase agreement, who has the ownership of the item? Now the normal consumer durables, now if you go to a place like Abans, Singer, like those places, they provide consumer durables to be obtained under hire purchase agreement. So in this kind of a situation, who gets the ownership of the equipment? It is the
vehicle who is using.
Yeah, it is the person who is using that gets the ownership, the legal ownership. When you enter into a hire purchase agreement, legal ownership passes on to the user. But as against the hire purchase agreement, in the case of a lease agreement, the legal ownership is with the lessor, the financial institution. It is the possession, that is the right to use, that passes to the lessee. So that's the distinction. So the lease access in the specific legal agreement, it has to be specifically stated this is not a hire purchase agreement. That has to be specifically stated. So these are some requirements that have been listed in the law itself, which should be contained in a lease agreement. Basically, that is to safeguard the interest of both the lessor and lessee. These requirements are there. Right. So the equipment is again defined in the law, which says any tangible asset which has an economically useful life of more than 1 year. So that is important. Now you have to use the equipment that has a useful life, because if that useful life is not there, then it is of no use for a lessee to obtain a lease, because he cannot use it for any purpose, because he is obtaining this equipment to make use for some economic activity. So if it doesn't have that economic useful life, at least for 1 year, then there is no purpose of entering into a lease requirement. So that has to be an asset, a tangible asset. Tangible meaning something you can touch and feel. And however, it does not include land, any improvements made to the land other than fixtures. Now, if it is something fixed to the land, yes, but not the land. And also immovable property attached to the land which can be removed from the land without substantial destruction. So if it is something fixed to the land which can be kind of removed and used, then that is otherwise it is not considered. If it is fixed, even fixed to the land, it cannot be considered as an equipment for the purpose of lease. So this is again to safeguard the interest of both lessee and lessor. The word equipment has been very clearly defined when it comes to for the purpose of finance leases. Who's eligible to become leasing, to engage in finance leasing? Commercial bank, specialized bank, finance company, or a public company incorporated with the prescribed, having the prescribed capital. Central bank prescribes the capital, and that minimum capital has to be there. But as I said, now the gradual tendency is to move away from having companies only for the purpose of finance leasing business. What is the main reason? Because it is difficult to operate a company only for the purpose of finance leasing business, mainly because of that business model. Now, what we call a business model is like how they are operating. They are getting their funding and then lending business. Now, when there is a company only for the purpose of finance leases, they are not in a position to get the normal funding from the general public. For example, banks and finance companies, they are raising majority of their funds from the general public as against other capital and borrowings that they have. But if it is a specialized leasing company, they can't mobilize deposits. They have to raise their funding from other forms. So broadly, they have to get bank borrowings, or maybe they have what they call the promissory notes or debentures. So these forms of fundraisings are costly than the normal deposit mobilization. So when it comes to the business operation of a leasing company, because their sources of funding, the cost of funding is relatively higher than a bank or a finance company, then what happens? When they provide finance leases, they will also have to provide those leasing facilities at a higher rate because they are mobilizing their funds at a higher cost than a bank or a finance company, since they don't have access to the public deposits. So in order to repay those fund providers, they have to therefore do their business also at a relatively higher cost. So they are finance leasing, the leasing will be provided at a relatively higher cost. So therefore, when there are banks, finance companies engage, most of the banks are now engaging in finance leasing. So there is a big competition then, and it is difficult for a company that is only engaging in leasing companies by obtaining finance from forms other than from the general public deposit mobilization. It's a bit difficult for them to survive because of the competition that comes from the banks and finance companies who can provide finance leasing business at much relatively low cost. So therefore, gradually there has been some of the leasing companies have gradually transformed themselves to finance companies, and even I think the other companies in time to come, there can be certain other business changes that happen because of this tight competition that they will have to face in mobilizing funding at a higher cost and then to provide the leasing finance leasing business. Again, similar way in kind of getting registration. So therefore, I will not go through this. You can go kind of read and go through them if you really need to get the information. But from an exam perspective, these details, I have not seen them being tested. So you don't really need to kind of buy out all these things for exam purpose. I have not seen questions, and there are other areas that have been tested. So this is the process similar to a bank finance company. The non-bank financial institution, the same department, then they will go through it. They will conduct investigations if needed. If it is applicant is suitable, it is a registration. A certificate of registration is issued and not a license. So once that is issued, it is called the registered finance leasing establishment. If it is a specialized company, if not, they will have carry the same name as a licensed finance company or company. So from this point, we have the insurance companies and other types of companies. I think we are almost reaching the time, which I will continue for the next class. So if you have any specific question, we can take up during this time. Any comments or clarifications? Okay. Anyway, at the end of the slides, the last slide, I have also given my contact details. If you wish, if you need to get, yes.
Do you going to upload this slide to Google Classroom?
I am not very sure of the procedure that IBSL follows, so it is now up to them to do, but I will pass on your query to them.
One student also asked in the chat, Buddhi or something, the same question.
Okay, with the so how did it happen last time?
After the session, it uploading, no? I
Ah,
won't check.
so okay, so maybe the same way. So IBSL has their procedure way of doing it, so they would follow the same.
Right.
Okay,
Thank you.
right. Okay, so then, yeah, anyone else? Okay, so if there are no other kind of questions from you, we will stop now.